My dad stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table, raised his glass and handed my younger brother a thick gold envelope. Inside were the deeds to our family home, the keys to the commercial real estate firm and Grandma Evelyn's vintage jewelry box. Then my dad turned to me, looked me dead in the eye in front of 12 dinner guests and said, "A daughter gets married and moves on. A son carries the legacy. You get nothing, sweetheart." I didn't scream. I didn't knock over the wine. I just watched my brother smirk as he slipped Grandma's heirloom sapphire ring into his pocket. But 30 minutes later the front doorbell rang. It wasn't dessert. It was Mr. Vance, Grandma's lifelong estate attorney, carrying 2 leather briefcases. When he opened the second sealed red file, my father's arrogant grin didn't just fade. It turned to absolute terror. "My name is Claire Davies. I am 32 years old, a certified forensic accountant, and for the last 8 years, I was the invisible engine running Davies Commercial Properties." While my father, Richard, played the role of the grand patriarch at charity galas and country clubs, I was the one at my desk until midnight, auditing lease agreements, restructuring tenant defaults and keeping 34 prime commercial buildings in Chicago cash flow positive. I did the heavy lifting, but I was never given the title. That belonged to my younger brother, Julian. Julian was 26, charming, reckless, and our father's golden child. He drove an $80,000 Porsche paid for by the company, took client prospects out to 4-star steakhouses, and called himself the vice president of business development. In reality, Julian barely understood how to read a balance sheet. Whenever he botched an acquisition or approved an unqualified tenant, my father would quietly walk the paperwork into my office and say, "Fix this for your brother, Claire. He's learning the ropes." Family protects family. I protected them, but the only person who ever truly saw my sacrifice was my grandmother, Evelyn Davies. When Grandma Evelyn had her first stroke 4 years ago, Richard suggested placing her in a private nursing facility out in Lake Forest so it wouldn't disrupt his schedule. Julian didn't even bother to visit until 2 weeks after her hospitalization. I refused to let her spend her final years in a sanitized room surrounded by strangers. I moved Grandma into my home. For 4 years I juggled 90-hour workweeks with caregiver shifts. I managed her medications, drove her to physical therapy, cooked her low-sodium meals, and held her hand when the arthritis flared up. On the quiet Sunday evenings when the rest of the family was out living their lavish lives on company credit, Grandma Evelyn would study me over her porcelain teacup. She was sharp as a straight razor until her final breath. 2 weeks before she passed, she took my hands, squeezed them with surprising strength and whispered, "Claire, your father plays chess with stolen pieces. Let him think he holds the board until the final move." I didn't fully understand what she meant then. But when Thanksgiving morning arrived and my father called an impromptu family meeting before dinner, announcing he had a monumental succession announcement to make, I knew the board was finally set. The dining room table was set with Grandma Evelyn's antique crystal and sterling silverware. 12 people sat around the mahogany banquet table, including my father's high-profile business partners and our extended family. The mood was celebratory, buzzing with the scent of roasted turkey and expensive Cabernet. At the head of the table, my father tapped his crystal glass with the edge of a butter knife. The room went silent. Richard smiled, soaking in the attention. He reached into the breast pocket of his tailored blazer and produced a thick gold envelope, placing it flat against the table. Next to it he set down Grandma Evelyn's polished rosewood jewelry box, the one that held her vintage sapphire ring and diamond-encrusted brooches. "As many of you know," my father began, his voice commanding and resonant, "today marks our first major family gathering without my mother. But legacy doesn't wait for grief. Tonight I am officially handing over the keys to Davies Commercial Properties. The primary portfolio, our downtown holdings, the family estate in Winnetka and Evelyn's private heirlooms." He picked up the gold envelope and turned directly toward Julian. "To my son, a Davies man through and through. The one who will carry our name into the next generation." Julian grinned, standing up to take the envelope and the jewelry box. The table erupted into polite applause. Julian slipped the sapphire ring out, slipped it into his jacket pocket and raised a smug, mocking eyebrow at me across the table. Then my father turned to face me. The room waited for his second announcement, the logical assumption being that the daughter who worked 60-hour weeks at the firm would receive her portion. Instead, my father's expression turned patronizing. And as for Claire, he said, speaking loud enough for every board member and cousin to hear, we appreciate the secretarial support you've provided over the years. But a daughter gets married, takes someone else's name and moves on. A company needs masculine strength at the helm. You were just helping out, sweetheart. You get nothing. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. Julian chuckled under his breath, lifting his glass to me in a mocking toast. Thanks for keeping my seat warm, sis. A younger, hotter-tempered version of myself would have thrown her glass, flipped the table or stormed out crying. But my accountant's mind took over. I took a slow sip of water, looked my father straight in the eyes and kept my face completely still. Let him think he holds the board, Grandma's voice echoed in my head. I checked my watch. 6:28 p.m. He had 2 minutes left. Right on cue, the chimes of the front doorbell broke the heavy silence of the dining room. My father frowned, visibly annoyed by the interruption to his coronation. Who on earth is showing up in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner? He muttered, gesturing toward the housekeeper to ignore it. Before anyone could move, the heavy double doors swung open. Stepping into the foyer was Arthur Vance. He was 71 years old, wearing a sharp charcoal three-piece suit, and carrying 2 thick leather-bound briefcases. Arthur had been Grandma Evelyn's trusted personal attorney for 45 years. He didn't just know the family's legal affairs, he knew every skeleton buried in every closet. My apologies for the intrusion, Richard, Arthur said, his gravelly voice carrying effortlessly across the dining hall. I have a scheduled delivery on behalf of the late Evelyn Davies. My father pushed back his chair, letting out an exasperated sigh as he stepped forward to intercept him. Arthur, whatever this is, it can wait until Monday morning. As you can see, we're in the middle of a private family dinner. Besides, as the designated executor of my mother's estate, I've already handled the distributions. Julian leaned back in his chair, twirling his wine glass with an arrogant smirk. Yeah, old man, the company and the assets are already mine. You're a day late and $1 short. Arthur didn't even look at Julian. He walked straight to the head of the table, set his primary briefcase down next to the roasted turkey, and popped the brass latches with 2 crisp metallic clicks. From inside he drew out a thick manila folder marked File Number 1. You are mistaken, Richard, Arthur said calmly, adjusting his reading glasses. You were named an alternate executor only under the 2014 will, which was formally revoked. My father froze. Revoked? What are you talking about? I hold the power of attorney, which expired the exact moment your mother drew her last breath, Arthur replied with razor-sharp precision. He pulled a certified document from File Number 1 and slid it across the mahogany table. 16 months ago, Evelyn Davies transferred 100% of the commercial real estate portfolio, the Winnetka estate, and her personal liquid assets into an irrevocable trust. You never had the legal authority to hand over those deeds today, Richard. Because as of last year, you didn't own a single square foot of this house. The dining room went completely breathless. Julian's smirk instantly vanished, his fingers freezing around the gold envelope. My father grabbed the paper, his hands trembling with rage as his eyes scanned the legal seal. This is impossible, Richard stammered, his voice losing every ounce of its booming confidence. She couldn't do this without me. She could, Arthur said softly. And that was only the beginning. Arthur reached into his second briefcase and pulled out a heavy red-tabbed dossier. The room was so quiet you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Which brings us to File Number 2, Arthur said, breaking the seal with a slow, deliberate slide of his finger. Before her passing, Evelyn commissioned a full independent forensic audit into Davies' commercial properties. My father's face drained of what little color it had left. A forensic audit? For what? For systematic embezzlement, Arthur stated bluntly. He turned the pages, laying out color-coded ledger sheets directly under my father's nose. Over the past 3 years, Richard, you authorized the transfer of $3.4 million in company operating capital into a shell entity registered under Julian's name. You used corporate reserve funds to cover Julian's luxury leases, private club memberships and mounting personal gambling debts in Atlantic City. Julian shot out of his chair, knocking his wine glass sideways. Deep red wine pooled across the white tablecloth, soaking into the gold envelope he had just bragged about holding. That's a lie. Dad told me that was my executive compensation. It was an illegal siphoning of trust assets, Arthur countered smoothly, not flinching for a second. And Evelyn documented every single wire transfer, every doctored receipt, and every fraudulent expense report with forensic precision. Arthur turned to the final page of the red file, where Evelyn's bold, elegant signature was stamped with a state notary seal. He cleared his throat and read aloud. To my son Richard, who believed bloodlines mattered more than integrity, your greed has blinded you. To my grandson Julian, who mistook entitlement for achievement, you have proven incapable of stewardship. Effective upon my death, Richard and Julian Davies are permanently stripped of all corporate authority, trustee standing and executive compensation. Arthur looked up, locking eyes with me across the table. I appoint my granddaughter, Claire Davies, as the sole trustee of the Evelyn Davies Family Trust and the managing chief executive officer of Davies Commercial Properties with 100% voting control. Furthermore, any missing capital embezzled by Richard or Julian must be repaid to the trust within 90 days, or full criminal charges and civil litigation shall be filed immediately. Arthur closed the red file with a sharp, echoing snap. Congratulations, Claire, Arthur said quietly. The company is yours. Total chaos broke out in the dining room. The guests who had applauded Julian just minutes earlier began scrambling out of their seats, grabbing their coats and mumbling rushed excuses to leave. Julian was hyperventilating, staring down at his trembling hands. Claire, wait. You can't do this. That money is already spent. If you call in those debts, I'm ruined. I'll go bankrupt. Then I suggest you sell your Porsche and your watch, I said, my voice cold, steady, and without a trace of anger. My father sank slowly back into his chair, looking 10 years older in a matter of seconds. The arrogance had evaporated from his eyes, replaced by pure, desperate calculation. Claire, sweetheart, listen to me. We are family. I made mistakes, yes, but everything I did was to protect our standing. You can't turn on your own blood. We can work this out together. I can mentor you. I can still run the public side. You told me 30 minutes ago that a daughter gets nothing, I said, walking slowly to the head of the table. I stood directly above Julian, extending my open hand. Grandma's ring. Give it to me. Right now. Julian looked at Richard, hoping for a rescue that wasn't coming, before reluctantly pulling the vintage sapphire ring from his pocket and dropping it into my palm. I slid it onto my finger, feeling its cool weight. It fit perfectly. You both have 30 days to clear your personal belongings out of the corporate headquarters, I said, looking between my father and my brother. After that, company security will escort you from the premises. Arthur Vance will handle all future communications regarding the repayment schedule. 6 months have passed since that Thanksgiving dinner. I restructured Davies Commercial Properties from the ground up, firing the corrupt middle managers and bringing in a transparent, qualified team. Under my direct leadership, the portfolio has already reached record occupancy and profitability. My father and Julian were forced to liquidate their luxury assets and downsize to modest rentals just to settle the trust's initial claims and avoid prison time. Grandma Evelyn knew all along that real power doesn't come from bluster, titles, or loud declarations at a dinner table. It comes from quiet discipline, meticulous truth, and knowing exactly when to play your hand. I was never just helping out. I was building an empire.